She asked you for space, and now part of you wants to reach out. You're watching a bunch of advice on YouTube, and people are all telling you something different. Go no contact. Tell her how much she means to you. Use these secret texts that will melt her back into your arms. Now you're confused more than ever, and you really just don't want to push her away any further. So in today's video, I'm going to bring an end to your confusion, calm to your panic, and put you on the best path on what allows her to want to close that space with you again. So make sure you watch until the very end. As men, we tend to not really understand how deeply destabilizing emotional distance can feel for us until we actually get presented with this type of situation, especially when it's coming from your wife when she starts to pull away emotionally. It really has a different feel than just regular relationship tension and the ebbs and flows that come with that. For a lot of men, it feels like an identity collapse that hits you like a Mack truck. Because think about it, the longer your marriage or relationship is, you become so familiar with each other, and it's completely human to have the variations of tension and stress that are going to impact the relationship. But unlike those more common or day-to-day squabbles, when she's pulling away emotionally, it's a shock to the system because suddenly the thing that used to feel so emotionally secure now feels very uncertain. And that uncertainty creates urgency, which is where we finally realize how destabilizing it can be to us. Now your nervous system starts firing off alarms that make you think something is wrong and you have to fix this immediately. And you need reassurance from her that things are going to be okay so that you can stop everything from getting worse. And honestly, I understand it. I'm a very calm, cool, collected kind of guy by nature, and I believe pretty much everything is solvable. I almost never get rattled, and generally, I'm always in a good, positive mood. I'm not saying all that to boast. I'm saying it because even with all those character traits, my nervous system was repeatedly disrupted when the relationship I was in during my decade of failed relationships and heartbreak was in the danger zone. The last straw was the tail end of that decade in my early 30s when my ex-fiancée shattered my world and told me she couldn't be with me anymore. I got all of those same alarm systems telling me to do the urgent things. Again, more proof that urgency creates bad decisions. But I did basically everything you can name. Over-texted trying to explain why she's making a mistake, chasing her emotionally and trying to force her to call me and talk to me. And of course, when nothing was working, I became overly emotional and pleaded, I should say begged, her not to do this. What I failed to see and understand, and what most men fail to as well, is that when she asks for space, it's because you've not been showing up as the emotional leader in the relationship. So her emotions have been slowly disconnecting over time. We don't really understand or consider any of that as men. We just see it as like an immediate decision, which then kicks us into that logical need to fix things fast. But when we present all that frantic energy in doing so, that just pushes her further and further away and convinces her that she's making the right decision. Because not only is she feeling the tension from trying to process her emotions disconnected from the relationship, she's now dealing with your barrage of emotional overwhelm, adding more pressure to the scenario. This is why you can completely send a very nice message and somehow it still feels heavy to her and you don't get the result you wanted and she still feels cold. And there are many guys who will stay stuck in victim mode and think, well, this isn't fair. She's the one doing this to me or us, and now I'm trying to make it all better and she's still acting cold. I understand why you may not think it's fair, but when you truly understand the way feminine energy works and how her emotional process functions, it actually does make complete sense. And if you have the discipline, you can use it to your advantage. This is where we need to shift the entire conversation a little bit to how you should be approaching it when she's asking for space. Because the real question isn't, should I text her? The real questions are, what emotional state would you be contacting her from? Is the communication heavy? Are you trying to pull her emotionally towards you? Are you respecting her nervous system? Are you contacting genuinely, like to genuinely connect with her? Or are you contacting to relieve your own anxiety? You can start to see the pattern a bit more in why those questions matter so much, because the distinction between genuinely trying to connect with her or texting to get responses that calm your own fears changes everything. Women are highly attuned to emotional subtext, especially in emotionally strained marriages. So a text to her that just says something like, hey, I'm just checking in, will really feel like you're asking for reassurance from her that we talked about. Those kind of texts don't do anything to actually give you reassurance, and that communication just starts feeling exhausting to her because of the emotional pressure hiding inside the text. That's the real problem. When she's asking for space, it isn't actually having to do with asking for less contact, although in a few minutes we're going to talk about why that is very beneficial, so keep watching. But the real underlying need for her that the entire request is based on is that she needs a relief from all the emotional pressure. That's a completely different frame. And when you understand this, you stop obsessing over texting rules, because there's no magical 3-day rule or no contact formula or perfect check-in timing. And I will say, for no contact, that is a very important aspect when you're talking about dating or early relationships, but it is different when you're talking about marriage or longer term relationships where there may be kids involved, for one, and because there's so much history built up. Again, I'll get into that nuance in a few minutes. The deeper game is about emotional energy. And honestly, that's why a lot of relationship advice fails men, because it really stays strictly behavioral and it feels good to hear these different tactics. And what happens is they focus on what exactly you should say or what you should text her, instead of actually focusing on who are you being emotionally when you're communicating. That emotional leadership ability plays a much larger role in determining how your communication feels to her, and that is the entire ball game. And you may say to me like, but I'm not trying to pressure her, and I tell her I'm not trying to pressure her, so why does she feel that way from me? Well, to really understand that, you have to nail down the distinction of pressure versus presence, because this is a real thing that she's reacting to. When you're just checking in or telling her you miss her and want things back the way they were, those aren't inherently evil things. But the issue is the hidden message underneath them is saying to her, please make me feel safe again emotionally. So when you're coming from a place of presence, which is what emotional leadership is all about, that tells her, I care deeply about this marriage, but I'm not going to emotionally suffocate you trying to relieve my own fears. That is mature masculine energy. You're stopping the emotional crowding that's making connection much harder for her. So should you actually stop contact completely? It's important to add some nuance to this, because obviously there are going to be some differences for every individual situation, but there are some baseline guidelines that you need to understand. If you see a lot of the shotgun advice out there, it's simply going to try and make it black and white, like never text her, or like I mentioned, go full no contact, or just disappear completely. That's not really emotionally intelligent or helpful to you at all, and it's definitely not how marriages work, especially long-term marriages with kids, homes, routines, responsibility, and all that emotional history. So let's look at a few different common scenarios to give you a better perspective and some actionable steps. If you are married and still living together, you may still communicate normally, but what needs to change is less emotional forcing, less reassurance seeking from her, less relationship interrogation, less pursuing energy, and less emotional monitoring. The goal is not to become emotionally unavailable. The goal is to stop creating emotional pressure and make a shift in your presence. And in a minute, I'm going to get into what you should really be focusing on during this time period where she asks for space, so stick with me. But to stop creating emotional pressure, it means conversations become simply emotionally cleaner, and you have to stop using every interaction to try and fix the relationship, get your own certainty, force some closeness, and basically stop your own anxiety. Also, if she works from home and you go to work, or the other way around, whatever the case may be, don't just send these extra text messages during the day as like a touch point to keep contact, because you're stewing in your own anxiety. Because when every interaction becomes emotionally loaded, she starts associating you with all that exhaustion, and that is not what you want. Now, if you're separated, this becomes even more important. Do not create fake reasons to reach out consistently. Do not send emotional essays of your thoughts and feelings and the memories that are coming into your mind. Do not repeatedly reopen relationship conversations, and please stop with the just checking in texts or calls to her. Because as we discussed earlier, 99.9% of the time, you're not checking in other than to try and get a snippet of reassurance for yourself. And the emotional reality to her is that every unnecessary emotional reach out resets her nervous system back into that pressure. Think about it from her perspective. She finally gets a little breathing room, and then boom, another emotionally loaded message arrives. Now her nervous system is bracing again, and basically that cycle just keeps up and keeps the emotional tension alive. So let her have her space to process her emotions and breathe. Now, if you're separated and you have kids, obviously contact is necessary and logistics need to be handled. The quality of the communication is still very important, and you have to make sure it stays strictly about the logistics and plans for the kids. Aside from that, allow her to have her space. And when you do have in-person contact with her, whether that's picking up the kids from her place or her dropping them off, doesn't matter what it is, you want to be positive. If she's taking space from you to get emotional relief, you don't want her experiencing you in the same anxious or grumpy or fearful, angry, whatever the emotional case may be. You need to have her experiencing you differently than the status quo that got the emotional relationship to this point in the first place. So be positive and set a good example for your kids and keep them the main focus. I can't stress that enough. Be the best dad you can be and keep her limited contact with you in these scenarios positive. This means you're being a grounded man and keeping your interactions, like I said, emotionally clean. And that brings us to something incredibly important: what you should actually be spending your time doing when she's taking that space. Please do not spend your time sitting around and waiting or sulking or hoping she changes her mind while giving her space or being separated. You absolutely cannot do that. That is just passively waiting and really just playing a victim to your own life. Once you do that, you basically give up all your control. You need to spend your time focused on strengthening your self-leadership and self-reliance and stop obsessing over controlling her emotional state. You should know by now it's fool's gold to think you can control her emotional process through pressure, reassurance seeking, or constant contact. When you start to rebuild yourself, only then can you successfully reconcile with your wife and rebuild a strong relationship. Because honestly, many men realize during separation or emotional distance that they have lost themselves inside the marriage. Their emotional stability became dependent on her mood, her affection, and her emotional availability, which is exactly why the panic sets into you in the first place when things start to go south. It doesn't just feel like the relationship is on the edge of a cliff. Your identity becomes meshed into the relationship as well, so it also feels on the brink. This is why space can actually become so transformational for both you and your relationship if you handle it properly. Space isn't a magical fix to marriages, but it gives her time to process her emotions, and it exposes what needs you to change. So you really have two choices: the almost guaranteed choice of sulking and hoping she can't live without you, or taking this time to focus on learning how to regulate your emotions, rebuilding your identity, improving your physical health, becoming more emotionally grounded, and getting back on track with your purpose, learning how to set proper boundaries, and really just rebuilding that self-respect. When you do all these things, it completely rebuilds your sense of being and confidence, and especially the self-respect part, and that's going to strengthen your identity, and that is what is deeply attractive to her and a big part of what's been missing. And even more importantly, it's emotionally safe. If you spend your time really developing these skills and transforming your identity to be the best version of yourself, she's going to experience that groundedness for you, and that's going to start to make her heart more curious about reconciling. If you're dealing with this in your marriage right now, check out my Relationship Rebuild Masterclass. It's free, and the link is in the pinned comment and description below. It's going to give you the best path to do all those things I mentioned and really show you the step-by-step reality to get your identity level transformation. And it's going to make you feel incredible, and it'll allow her to see you in a different light. That is what will spark the reconnection with her when you show up as the best version of yourself and you learn how to create that emotional safety. Because at the deepest level, this is really about testing who you are emotionally. The most common outcome is that we panic when space appears and we spiral into trying to do everything we can to get her back emotionally and not lose the relationship. And that is almost a guaranteed nail in the relationship coffin that we can never recover from. The one thing we are not taught as men, and I had to go figure this out the hard way after repeated heartbreak, we're not taught how to lead a relationship and understand how the feminine emotions work. I speak for myself going through it and finding what works, and that of my clients who committed to the relationship rebuild process. It's going to change your life when you're serious about making that transformation for yourself, because nobody can make that decision for you except for you. So again, the link for the free Relationship Rebuild Masterclass is in the description and pinned comment below. And if your wife has asked for space, I made another video breaking down exactly what she's watching for during that space, and I strongly recommend you watch it right here next.